Welcome once again to episode 7 of Express Talk, and after missing last week, we are back this week with the man of many hats, Phil Stamper. Thank you for joining me.
Not a problem. How are you?
I'm doing good. How about you?
So far, so good.
That's good. Good to hear. So you ready to talk about some wrestling?
Oh, absolutely.
So, I don't know if you have kept up to date with with the circus that is TNA Wrestling, but
I have not watched their on-screen product in a long time, but I think like everybody else, seen the passing words of what might be happening behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Including one very interesting for real lawsuit.
Yeah, I saw the summons. Or whatever yeah. I've been up to date on it too, is what I'm saying.
Gotcha.
So I guess the best way to start is, do you think that, or how much do you believe that the company's in debt and needs to be sold, and, you know, just that side of things?
Well, I mean, part of it is hard to say, because one of the things that has been keeping them afloat for apparently as long as they have is that they have good international television deals, and that seems to be what pushes them to remain a televised product. Of course, I think there is an argument that can be made as to whether or not they could become more profitable. But the rumor has always been that they've been operating at a loss. That Dixie Carter's family that owns Panda Energy has been trying to say, hey, we need to change this model. And seemingly they have a little bit. They lost a lot of their higher contracts. They pay a lot more people individually, like per event kind of appearances, though they still have television exposure. So it seems like they were keeping some of those costs down. But I'm interested in seeing. Okay, so here you have Billy Corgan, who seems to be in a spot where he was like, no, I was promised this majority control, and I really don't have that. And so how is that defined? What was on paper? You know, I think that's some of the things that are going to come out in the wash as time goes on.
Mm-hmm. So that is is that the extent of Billy's lawsuit against the company, that he paid for majority control but didn't get it?
That seems to be it, because I think wrapped in there, then, at least to me, that's saying there's some kind of contractual issue here. Whether it's I'm supposed to have control due to the amount of money I put in, I'm not getting, or we need to renegotiate the terms of this contract because I don't want to be found at fault if I don't give this money. But if I'm giving this money, I want this thing. So I think that really is determinable by what happens in court next. What was on paper for them to decide?
Yeah, that seems like the likely next step for all parties. I mean, in general, I just think that this company, whole process has become somewhat of a circus, because, I mean, I feel bad for TNA that it seems like every time they're in the news, it's something bad.
Yeah. Seemingly, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's just it, too. You know, we don't know a lot about what happens behind the scenes.
Exactly.
And again, if some of this business stuff is true, you know, what is it that they want to do? What is it that Billy Corgan wants to do to steer the ship in a different direction?
That's true. That's true. In your opinion, because I know you've been, you have a part in other wrestling companies, do you think that TNA is capable of being saved, or do you think it's fair to say that it's time to cut the losses?
Well, and here's sort of the odd take on that is, you know, they've been mocked for a long time that they're really the they were basically created the year after WCW closed, and many people sort of felt like it was as if WCW were closed and they just became TNA in some respects. And so if that is really the case, I don't. They certainly could have a good fan base, but then I think they've even alienated what fan base was there for that. I do know some very diehard TNA fans, and I don't understand why they're diehard. I've tried to understand why they're diehard. I kind of want to understand why they're diehard, and I just don't see it. I don't get the interest. And I just don't think they create a buzz the same way. I don't think the same product is presented that way. To kind of put it into context, excuse me. To put it into context, a couple years ago, I went on vacation down to Universal Studios and had totally forgotten that TNA was filming there. And while we're walking through the park, there's a guy literally barking in the street. And I wish I could remember his name because he was an on-air manager. And my friend who was with me, who was no way associated with wrestling, was like, "Hey, Phil, we need to go to this." And I was on vacation, and because I'm involved with wrestling, for me, part of vacation was like, I need to be away from wrestling. Okay, let's go see wrestling. And 3 matches in, he's like, "All right, Phil, I'm done. I need to go." And this was at the time TNA had, so maybe it's been, I think 3 years. I mean, they had Hulk Hogan, RVD, Chavo Guerrero, I think was the match that my friend turned to me and was like, "Okay, we got to get out of here." And I feel very bad for that. Because with that caliber of talent, there should be something bigger, something better, and for whatever reason, it just wasn't coming off.
I agree. I haven't seen TNA since last year, and in all honesty, the only reason why is because now they're on Pop TV. Mm-hmm. That's not an insult to Pop. That's just saying that because of the lower exposure that the channel provides, it's harder for people to see them.
I agree.
And also, I just want to throw this disclaimer in, which it seems like I put in every single one of my videos, especially the podcast, and especially since the conversations of TNA sale and TNA going out of business and TNA this and TNA that. Though in some cases I do make light of TNA, this is in no way, shape, or form any of the guests that I have on, and myself included, and Phil could speak to this too. We do not want TNA going out of business.
Absolutely not.
We make jokes about it, but we don't want it to go out of business.
Right. It is a place where people inside the business are getting work. It's exposure. It is another option. And for a while, people thought of it really as the athletic competition to what WWE was doing.
I agree.
And that they weren't the quote-unquote television show that WWE was, or is, in some people's minds. So, and now I think that pendulum has completely swung. Well,
now, do you think that the reason why it swung is because, in particular, I would say around 2010, TNA started to try and be too much like WWE?
I was just going to say that too. I think when you look at how WWE has continued to evolve over time, of course that's sort of the golden standard in the world of professional wrestling. Mm-hmm. WWE is the top-rated wrestling program in the world. Their website and social media hits are the highest of any professional wrestling organization in the world, and there's a reason for that. But that's because they put themselves out as a television product, not as a great wrestling event. Though I will now say they're doing things that up their wrestling quality, which of course now could be countered that they're also having some of the lowest rankings on Raw that they've had in 30 years, which is hard to see because the wrestling is increasing. Mm-hmm. The wrestling side of wrestling is increasing in the WWE. But I think that's just it. I think TNA went too much into we need to be the television product. And they really, I think, lost that opportunity to be the niche, we're the athletes on television product.
I completely agree with that, with everything you just said, and I'm going to take it a step further and ask, do you think that creatively, even though everybody always says that Vince is this and the WWE is that, and they know they don't have wrestling people, they have writers, do you think that in a way TNA missed the boat on that?
You mean by not coming out at first as a television product, or what do you mean?
Like, I mean, I could be wrong, but in my opinion, the WWE's best time was when they had people who didn't know wrestling mixed in with people who did know wrestling on the creative team.
Mm-hmm.
TNA never did that.
Keep going, I'm sorry.
TNA never did that. They only had, either an all-wrestling creative team or, a small creative. Like, they've never had, I know Dutch Mantel booked a territory, he booked a little bit in Memphis, and he booked for TNA. But then you have Jeremy Borash, who also booked for TNA. No offense to JB, but in my opinion, you need to, like, wrestling booking, and you could, I'm sure, speak to this, wrestling booking, you need to have somebody to sit, like, you need to have a teacher. Like, you need to be able to sit under the learning tree and learn from that teacher to actually know the right way to book, right way to format, the right way to do things, and I feel like the people in TNA never had that opportunity.
In many ways, I would agree, and I think there's been opportunities along the way that they never truly manifested themselves. I might be wrong, but isn't Eric Bischoff also in a lawsuit with TNA?
He is.
And I don't want to be mistaken here. I think just from what I recollect from an article where he was interviewed, him saying that it is due to things that he felt were promised him. I don't know if he gave money per se, but I think it was an element of he didn't have some of the control. And if you look through the history of wrestling, and you look at what Eric Bischoff did with WCW, and even Hulk Hogan when he came to WCW, and the influence that he had on the televised product, and seemingly Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff were not extended that full amount of control, and something can be said for the amount of control that they did extend on the product, but by not having that full reign of people who did have both sort of elements of the TV and the wrestling experience. Okay, and Jeremy Borash has certainly been around wrestling also for I would say over 20 or about 20 years now. But when it comes to the production side, I don't know how experienced he is. He's never been an in-ring competitor, so having an awareness of the stars and what they need or want to be able to move forward in wrestling, I think he could have been challenged there. I don't know. Dutch Mantel, everybody seems to have praised the time of Dutch being in control of the booking there. Seemingly, though, people seem to have tongue-in-cheek disagreed with how Dixie has run things, and maybe it's tongue-in-cheek because, well, she was running things, and how much do you want to say against the boss?
Yeah, that's true. Well,
I think what is interesting is when you have a television product that, like wrestling, and I'm going to sort of step outside of a comfortable box for some people, wrestling was really the first reality show. People watch it and are like, this is happening. And they feel like they're exposed to the lives of these people. And when you look at the marketing side of it, it sometimes doesn't translate that same way. WWE, of course, now does an excellent job. They're a 24/7 machine, and even before they had the network, their social media was on point. They were constantly putting out content. Here's a clip from here. Let's talk about this random thing. Let's put out this news article. Let's put out this picture. Let's talk about our tour. And TNA, it seems like they would have moments where they would do that, but I don't think it's as consistent. And when you look at the history of who they've hired to run more of the office thing, it has been a television staff. And so, again, there's that element of, we're just creating a TV show, but not really realizing jeopardizing sort of the immersive experience that happens inside of wrestling.
I completely agree, and one of my problems, I think I said this in a previous video, that one of my problems with TNA is I feel like they have not taken advantage of the marketing aspect of wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know, okay, TNA does not have the exposure, but they still have as much exposure as Vince, but they still have social media, they still have their website, they still have YouTube, DVD distribution, etc. They have all they want. They have, the connection in Nashville because of how long Dixie, they have the local connection. They may not have the national connection, but they have the local connection or the regional connection. And they never took advantage of it. The marketing, they never took advantage of the marketing aspect of the business.
Right.
And before I get to my last question to you on this topic, I just want to take back what I said. I don't think that JB actually booked the company, but I know he was on the creative team for a time with the company.
From what I can remember, he did an interview with Colt Cabana, and he was part of the original group that started the company. So I can only imagine that he absolutely had an element of say in how things were, at least in the early days.
Okay. That's fair. The last question I wanted to ask you, do you think that it may be fair to say that TNA's problem was the infighting?
Seemingly, and I say seemingly because, of course, I'm not there, but when you look at the amount of lawsuits, and it sort of caveated with that statement of, I thought I was going to get more control or more of something. Okay, so something is missing. Now, whether that resulted in fighting per se, who's I would have to imagine from any organizational standpoint that it had to have gotten there if it's at the point where now these are being moved forward in a lawsuit.
I agree. And with personalities like, people have heard the stories of Jeff Jarrett having Vince Russo and Dutch Mantell being on Jim Cornette's side. That hurts the company when people don't see eye to eye, and it basically kills any possibility of long-term planning.
Mm-hmm.
And then with Eric and Russo and Hogan, especially Russo and Hogan, if they had not, put behind them the WCW issues, as far as TNA now goes, I mean, the fact that Matt Hardy has creative control pretty much of his character, in my opinion, shows how little of a role that TNA Creative may have.
Maybe, and you know what? Maybe it was just the savviness of Matt Hardy. And of course, now one of the rumors going around is that Matt Hardy may end up purchasing WCW, but I don't know how legitimate that is. And that could be a very interesting turn of events.
That's true too. That is true. Well, actually, this will be my last question, and then we'll move to the next one. Because I just had something pop into my head. Since with your with your background in wrestling, is it now? Not everybody knows, but in the past, two former WWE employees have been given a lot of control over TNA, as being both the head of creative and the president of talent relations. Is it fair to say that, first, it's possible to give somebody too much to do at one time, and second, if they had no history running a creative team, should they be in charge of the creative team?
I think it depends on what they bring to the table, because having the experience of running a creative team is such a unique niche that, who gets some of those opportunities. So that's difficult to say, because at the end of the day, it is how that team works together. Creative has to work with production. Are you able to select good hires? And part of that good hires is not just their capabilities inside of a wrestling ring, but if you are on a televised product, can you work with production? Can you work with production cues, with television times, with the way you have to market yourself at the company, and can you push that? And then, are all of those decisions supported? Who has say over what? So it is a bit of a tightrope balancing act that somebody who comes from creative, let's say in the WWE, who then moves over into TNA, it's a differently operated beast, and it may not work there.
I agree. Now, after this extended conversation, probably the longest conversation I've had on TNA in a while, we move to the next bullet, and that is the big return from last Monday night on Raw, Goldberg, and his upcoming match with Brock Lesnar. So what did you think of Goldberg's return to WWE?
A lot of nostalgia going into it. I've seen a lot of people talk very positively of how he came out, how he appeared, that this was probably the best promo they've ever heard from Goldberg. I think I would agree. I think it is his best promo. I don't know if it was a good promo, but it was the best promo I think Goldberg's ever done. I think it's interesting that they're moving in this direction of Brock versus Goldberg. Though I do think it is slightly unfortunate that those people who also remember their last encounter, where both men were leaving the WWE, and the match was universally panned because it was so universally booed. I'm almost surprised that hasn't hurt them. But so far, there's a lot of positive energy going into it. It's a time of nostalgia, so let's see if they can ride the wave.
I agree. I think that part of it may be that Brock ran out of opponents.
Well, and let's also kind of look at how things have been progressing lately. And if you look at Raw, and they've been hurting in their ratings, and okay, who is out there that could get this kind of buzz right now? And this was it. And they have they've stretched it out to 3 weeks, but I think they've done it in an absolutely brilliant way. Okay, here's a week where you put out that Goldberg is going to come, and then there's a seeming response from Camp Lesnar. Okay, then the next week you bring out Goldberg. Okay, then next week it's going to be either Lesnar or Lesnar, confronting Goldberg. So I think they've stretched it out excellently for television. I'm interested in seeing. Actually, they might have already been out today, and I haven't seen them. Maybe it has positively impacted their ratings, and I really hope that is the case.
I agree too. I hope so too.
What about you? Any other thoughts that you might have?
I mean, I'm very interested because, partially because I've never heard Goldberg cut a better promo than he did on Monday. And, well, the other part is that I wonder if they can put forth a better match now than they did in 2004.
I think that one of the most interesting takeaways from Goldberg's promo was, I'm trying to think of the exact wording of, I can tell you you're going to be next, but I can also tell you that you're going to be last. Saying, basically, I'm just here for this match, that's it. So he's making very clear this is a unique, one-time appearance opportunity. This is not like him in a recurring wrestling capacity for the WWE. So that's a very interesting tell in itself as well, that he would also be so bold to say that, because that puts a definitive stamp and marker on this match being unique and it not being dragged out.
Yeah. But I'm also puzzled by the fact that if this is his last match, why is it against Brock Lesnar?
And again, I think it has a lot to do with nostalgia. Here you have a way that you can push older content that is sitting on the WWE Network. You can talk about nostalgia of WCW. I think there's a way to plug it. It kind of makes sense. And here's a guy that has not only beaten Lesnar, but he's beaten everybody. There used to be a game that some guys and I used to play, like, who have you beaten in indie wrestling that has beaten somebody that has beaten Goldberg, and who has the shortest link to that? And it was just a stupid game, but it was true. I mean, Lesnar comes from a time, and the way they plugged it on WWE was absolutely accurate. He became the first WCW World Heavyweight Champion by being undefeated. And that hadn't happened in the history of wrestling. So that is unique, and they can use that footage and continue to use and build off of it. So I just think it makes sense to incorporate a past feud, and you have a moment to relive some nostalgia.
Mm-hmm. I can agree with that. Now, as far as the brand split in general, what is your opinion of the brand split so far?
Yeah, I'm really hoping that the ratings for Raw have increased for this week. And again, I know they're also in tough competition right now. They are in the middle of football season. Fall television just kicked off. I mean, yes, these are the lowest ratings they've had in 20 years, but at the same time, they have had a lot of competition right now compared to, I think, the spring, where they were the top-rated TV show on Monday nights, and outdoing all sports content specifically. So I think it's just a very interesting time, like what has changed in just the landscape of entertainment, that their ratings are this currently low. So I really hope that swings back around for them. And SmackDown is holding it about the same ranking that Raw is at, and has had a couple times where I think they've spiked higher twice in the last couple months. But when I say higher, I don't mean by a huge amount, just about the same rating. And so is it that they've lost an audience? Is it that, I missed it Monday, well, I'll just watch the new show on Tuesday, and then I'll catch what I missed on the network, which is translating into lower ratings? But I really hope and WWE to turn it around.
Yeah, I agree. Speaking of Raw, though, they announced that at Survivor Series there will be three traditional Survivor Series elimination matches between the two brands. Do you think it's too soon for the brands to have that sort of interaction?
Well, no, because they're not going into a specific storyline with it per se. Like, there isn't a John Cena on SmackDown really has resentment against Seth Rollins on Raw. They're not running something like that where it's going to cross brands in that way. And so I do feel that it's going to be less specific and more just sort of general. They're going to build up the dynamics of the teams and their interactions from the individual brands. So I don't think it's too early to do that. But overall, I am concerned about just the well-being of the brand split and whether or not it is really working. Though I will personally say I am so glad that we got to see the Headbangers back for a week on SmackDown, and I'm so glad that I've known Kenny for a very, very long time, and on a personal level, I'm really happy that the Spirit Squad are back. Kenny was an excellent talent in many ways. When I look at Dolph Ziggler, I'm like, that was supposed to be Kenny.
I agree.
And So I really like what they've done on SmackDown to push themselves. It is not the same television show that you watched on Fridays before they moved to Tuesdays.
Yeah. I will say this, that overall, maybe the brand split thus far has not given the WWE the results that they've wanted, but it definitely has helped SmackDown.
Absolutely.
It has definitely helped SmackDown become somewhat more of its own brand again and watchable television. Well, now as we continue on, we go back to talking about somebody who we spoke about earlier, and that's because it's time for the Russo spot. For any new listeners who don't know what this is, when Vince Russo was booking the WWE, in many ways he changed the way a wrestling show is booked with his Crash TV style of booking. So now I'm giving it to the guest. If you can change a particular gimmick, a particular booking style, or any stigma that may be attached to this modern pro wrestling, what would you change?
Wow. So, I think that there's a couple things. I think that you have lost a little bit of the sense of reality. And what's interesting to me, and I've had a couple of fans very recently, oddly enough, tell me this, that, quote unquote, this is their words, not mine, we know the deal with what we're seeing in the ring, but we know the drama is real, and these two guys really don't like each other. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, oh, that's an interesting take on it. And when I watch the WWE sometimes, for some things, that sense of reality isn't there per se. And some of it is what you call sort of that Crash TV style, where it was sudden and it was impactful and it was a surprise, until they got very consistent and then it wasn't anymore. But where are some of the surprise elements? And that's a thing for me that I do kind of miss, that I do kind of want to see more of. A little bit, not necessarily of older names coming back that we haven't seen in a while, though I kind of wish it went into it a little bit differently, but like Sami Zayn coming out on Braun Strowman and then trying to say, I'm the little guy fighting the big guy because nobody else will. And again, I kind of wish they went into that a little bit differently. But, that was a little bit of a surprise, because, who would stop Braun, and now he's going up against three guys at a time. He created, oh God, help with James Ellsworth. And what is interesting is, though it's the same production crew, but SmackDown seems to be doing it better. They seem to be doing little things in certain ways that are getting kind of like an, oh, that's kind of neat response.
I agree. And I will also say this, that I've liked Dean's work without the title more than I have with the title.
And a lot, I've heard that a lot. I've always found it a little bit more interesting when the face is trying to reach for the title.
Yeah.
And Dean is all over the place. And AJ is a great champion, and I am so happy that the WWE has done well with him.
Mm-hmm.
Because conversely, when I look at Raw and I look at how Luke Gallows and Kyle Anderson are doing, they're not doing very well. Some of it I get, some of it I don't get. Luke Gallows in person is hilarious. He has friggin' energy like you wouldn't believe, and I see him on WWE, and it's like, oh, this is not the same guy. Mm. And I don't know why it's not the same guy. I don't know why it's not translating well. And yes, I totally see WWE is a mainstream television product. There's only so much you could do to a certain limit to push the envelope before you start really upsetting people. And in this day and age, you know, we've reverted to having more PC conversations. And that's really interesting to see on some of our television. So that means they can't do some of the semi-controversial stuff, and I'm not saying all of it was good, but it is a little hard to push the envelope without doing something that is socially inappropriate. And that's a very difficult challenge to do. But then I look over at Lucha Underground, and everything from the way their building looks to how they tell their stories is so unique. It has done nothing but help them. And granted, their ratings are not, well, they're not almost too far away from a Raw at this point. But that has been executed so well. And when they have sort of pushed that envelope, there hasn't been that blowback in that particular way. Now, granted, they have a huge blessing in the fact that the head of their network loves them and loves wrestling and wants them there. But I think that's what WWE needs a little bit more, a little bit of sort of a refreshment of some of the controversy. And in my life outside of wrestling, I had some time at one point the president of the organization tell me, you know, we have to own our story. We have to own who we are, even if it's bad. Even if the story's negative, it still puts the spotlight on us, and we get to control the spin.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, you know, credit to, I believe it's Krista Joseph who would receive a lot of the credit to the success of Lucha Underground, being the head booker of the company. But also not just credit to him, but also credit to all those folks over at Lucha, because they're obviously doing something right.
Right.
And I agree completely that a lot of the surprise factor is missing in the WWE, but I think in the same respect, it's overdone in TNA. And just
and again, because I haven't watched the product in a while, I feel like I'm I don't know, maybe my thoughts of TNA are a little too harsh, but actually I'll put it this way: the last clip I saw was when they revealed their new title, and forgive me, I can't remember the name of their new title. And here's Billy Corgan, a rock star, in the ring, presenting this new title. My thought of having Billy Corgan, a legitimate rock star, in the ring is not someone who's wearing a suit that would look better on my grandfather. Presenting this cloaked title belt. I wanted a rock star. I wanted somebody who would get up there and have energy and display that and do something maybe a little bit outside the shtick of TNA. And that's not what I saw. And I immediately lost interest and didn't want to watch again. It isn't necessarily anything new, and I think you have to keep pushing an envelope. I think you have to keep presenting yourself differently and in different ways, and I think that has almost always been a challenge of TNA.
I agree, and I believe the name of the title is the TNA Grand Champion or Grand something. It's the Grand something, because Aaron Stevens or Aaron Rex or whatever the heck he's calling himself these days is the Grand Champion. Not that it, really counts, but yeah. Well, now, as we head to the next portion of the show, and actually the newest spot on the show, I'll give a little bit of background. In the last episode that I did, episode 6, me and my guest spoke a lot about the WWE Hall of Fame. And I figured with the fact that I would wager to guess that probably give or take maybe 2 weeks before the Rumble or maybe the week after the Rumble, we'll be getting the first inductee into the 2017 class of the WWE Hall of Fame. So even if it's just speculation now, if you could, I don't know, pick 5 or 6 names that you think should or might get inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame next year, who would you pick?
I would want to pick Demolition. I don't believe either one are in at this point.
No. They're not.
I think that they... Well, A, they were the longest reigning WWE Tag Champions in history. They won it for 698 days. I think absolutely that they should be included into that. And some of this is almost very difficult because my brain is also forgetting, wait a minute, who has not had it yet? Professor Tanaka, I can't remember if he had it, but him and Mr. Fuji. Mr. Fuji already is a Hall of Famer, but Tanaka and Mr. Fuji were the second longest reigning WWE Tag Champions in history at 569 days. So I think Tanaka belongs there too. My brain is spinning because I've absolutely forgotten some of the people I looked at previously. And hey, he presented some controversy in the world of wrestling. Wrestling kind of needs that. I will say I don't necessarily always agree with his opinion, but that's why it's an opinion, because everybody's entitled to it. Jim Cornette. He had so much involvement in the world of wrestling. He's been so involved in the history of wrestling. Outstanding manager. He ran WWE's development system for a long time, though he did not end that reign well. He was involved in WWE for a long time. I think that would be a great entry. This is going to be outside of the scope of traditional WWE, but we've seen them do some more outreaches. I would love to see Skandar Akbar nominated into the Hall of Fame. For those of you who don't know who he is, he was a part of the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, so the predecessor of the WWF. He was a long mainstay inside of World Class Championship Wrestling, which now WWE owns the rights to. He was probably one of the greatest wrestlers, if not the, and I think there's an argument for it to say the greatest managers in wrestling history. And what got me there was my favorite wrestler watching on ESPN Classic when I would watch World Class was Eric Embry. But what made Eric Embry so great was this feud that he had with Skandar Akbar at a time Skandar was not a wrestler. And now Skandar had been a wrestler previously, but he was a manager. And as a non-wrestling personality, he was the one this feud wrapped around. He was calling the shots. And I've always enjoyed that about Skandar Akbar. So I think he would be a tremendous addition to the Hall of Fame. And the more scope that WWE has in the world of professional wrestling, the more they extend their arms around how they just, they own rights to so much in wrestling. I think that's just it. I think let's continue that scope and span. Think there's something to be said for athletes from another country. So somebody like, well, I think my brain is totally slipping on the name. Giant Baba, I think, was one of the first professional wrestlers from China. So I think and I might be mistaken on the name. I really might be mistaken on the name. But I think that would do something to a growing market that I think China is one of those places, and I know it is very hard to get to the country to do entertainment. At the same time, recognizing, I think, somebody from China might do really well to establish a positive working relationship. And I do think China. I think with her passing, she also said a lot about what women can do inside of wrestling. She broke that mold of being able to do intergender matches. She was a part of DX, and who was not recognized in that way when DX was recognized. So I think China would be an excellent addition.
I completely agree with that, and I will. Well, before I get to who I would pick, I just want to ask, who would be considered your, big ticket person, like Sting was this year, and Macho Man was it last year. Who would be your big ticket item?
That is actually a tough one. I did forget to say, I'd probably say on the celebrity side, William Shatner. I'm shocked that he hasn't gotten it yet. If you look back over 30 years, William Shatner's actually done a lot of WWE work, and he recently actually did narration over Breaking Ground on the WWE Network.
Yeah.
So I think there's been a long time working relationship with him. So I think that would be a fair entrant on the celebrity portion of the WWE Hall of Fame. But on the wrestling side, I don't know. To me, though, I would love to say that China and a Demolition would be outstanding representatives of the Hall of Fame and people who could stand up the Hall of Fame and the Hall of Fame induction.
Yeah,
I don't know if they would have the same kind of buzz and draw of a Macho Man, and I don't mean that in a negative way. But I'm trying to think who sort of is the next guy or gal that would bring that acclaim.
I honestly think that due to the strained relationship in some ways between WWE and China, that it would actually, the fact that China would actually get honored to go into the Hall of Fame would actually be enough to stand up to being could be, I don't want to say would be, but could be enough to stand up to being the big ticket item or big ticket inductee this year.
And I remember a couple years ago there was talk of them doing an induction of like a classic match, like the main event of the first WrestleMania. Certain things that were iconic in the history of wrestling, and nominating those folks. They nominated the Four Horsemen. I think there's something to be said for a possibility of that. Being a way in for some additional folks. I have a feeling you won't see the unit of DX getting nominated into the Hall of Fame, because I think all of them I could say, well, wait a minute, we're still competing out there. And Triple H is COO of the company and still now and again will compete. So I don't think he's quite ready to be the Hall of Fame guy.
Yeah.
You know what? There's something to be said, and this may be weird because he's still there too. But Vince McMahon himself.
Yeah, that's true. Unless they hold that off until they go back to New York.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I will say that as far as who I think could go in next year, I agree with you as far as stables go, but I was going to say the Hart Foundation, but because of the likelihood of Minneapolis hosting a WrestleMania, I think it would be better to wait for the Hart Foundation until WrestleMania in Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
Or Minnesota, or where you. Yeah, the point is, as far as the big ticket, I think right now would be the best time for DX to go in, even if they're still. It's just the idea of get him in before Hunter takes over the company.
Yeah.
Because then.
It is Hunter.
Yeah.
If it is Hunter, if you know.
That's true. That's a good point. But I think as far as the big ticket item, I think Trish Stratus could be the big ticket item. Is she actually? Oh no, she's in already. Yeah.
She's not in yet?
No, she's in already. Yeah.
Well, The Undertaker.
That's a good point. Or I was going to say The Rock could also be the hometown Miami, the Miami guy, since it's, Miami this year, that they could induct him in Miami. But I'm actually going to switch him out and say The Undertaker, because that could be a way to get him involved with WrestleMania, because I don't, especially with his recent hip surgery, I don't think he'll be ready for WrestleMania. Or in any condition to actually compete at WrestleMania this year.
We'll see, though. I mean, and if you sort of time it out, WrestleMania is where are we at? 6 months away? So, now closer to 5 now, but there could be enough time depending on the success of the surgery.
That's true.
No, I was thinking, I was trying to think in my head if Undertaker had hip surgery before, but I don't think it was him. It was Hulk Hogan who had hip surgery before. And he came back to wrestle more, so I think it's up in the air.
Well, also with the rumors being that Taker was very pissed off at Vince for wanting Taker to put over Shane at WrestleMania, and I think the proof in that Taker was supposed to put Shane over is that Shane got the authority figure role anyway.
Right.
So, I can't really blame Taker for not wanting to come back after basically being told to put over the boss's son who hasn't wrestled in 7 years at WrestleMania inside Hell in a Cell. Yes, okay, it's Taker's gimmick, it's Taker's show, but, there's no undefeated streak, but still, you're asking him to put over a 46-year-old office worker who hasn't been in the ring in 7 years. But yeah, I'm gonna go with what you said as far as Taker being the meal ticket this year. And I am also going to go with Rick Rude as being one of the posthumous inductees into the Hall of Fame. And I'm going to also agree with you on Giant Baba.
I don't know why. For some reason, I thought Rick Rude was already in. He's probably not. But my brain thought he was.
Yeah, no, he's not in. He's not in yet. And the reason why I'm emphatically behind you with Giant Baba is because Antonio Inoki and Tatsumi Fujinami are both in the Hall of Fame already. So I think it's fair that Baba gets inducted to honor both New Japan and All Japan, even though WWE does have more of a history with New Japan because of their old partnership. I think that either Junichi Tenryu or Baba should get inducted. Tenryu because of his history with All Japan and being one of their top stars, and also his history with WWE.
Oh, I don't think it would not be this year at all. But my brain just went Paul Heyman.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I don't think it'll be this year. I think he's too active with Brock. I think once his run with Brock is over, I think then you would see Paul Heyman into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I think once they head back to New York, he could be a meal ticket in New York. I'm also going to stick with one of the guys that I picked 2 weeks ago, rather, and that is either Hillbilly Jim or Steve Lombardi. But I also think Steve Lombardi may be better off to go in New York.
I agree. And I think that's a little too recent after his departure.
Mm-hmm. I could see that. I mean, I said Taker, Rick Rude, what's his name? The NWO.
Mm-hmm.
The NWO. And, since this is not, an actual, it's not listing, making a list of the actual people who will get inducted, but I think Bruiser Brody definitely should go into the Hall of Fame. If not, because of the effect that he had on the business, which if you don't know the effect that Brody had on the business, speaking to the listeners, look at either the PWI Year-End Awards or the Wrestling Observer Year-End Awards. The best brawler of the year is entitled the Bruiser Brody Award.
Mm-hmm.
That should tell you the influence Brody had on the wrestling business.
I think that's fair. I think that's a good choice.
Especially with the fact that Stan Hansen also went into the Hall of Fame last year. You also you could have Vader, or you could have anyone who really had a history with Brody. I mean, in all honesty, I think that having Taker induct Brody might be an accurate way to go in, because Taker's first match was against Brody.
I think that makes sense.
In World Class. Now, speaking of this, speaking of the Hall of Fame, there was rumors, I don't know if you heard about them, but there were rumors earlier in the year when, there were, well, first I'll ask you, do you think that WWE will ever make a physical building for the Hall of Fame?
I remember seeing some of those comments before, that they were also looking at a facility possibly in Orlando.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of wonder if they were looking at a facility in Orlando that is what led to the Performance Center, and not looking for a Hall of Fame. So I don't know. I think it can make a lot of sense
mm-hmm.
for them to do.
Mm-hmm.
A tremendous amount of sense.
Yeah.
But at the same time, because WrestleMania does float, it's not going to always be in Orlando. I think that would be a challenge. And plus, because of the way they currently do the Hall of Fame, and again, that's sort of part of the WrestleMania experience, that having it then in a separate location physically might be a little challenging. I would say, I feel like I'm pointing towards no, unless they made some place where they regularly go. If it had been in the conversation, let's look at a facility that's in New York City, I would say, that makes plenty of sense. They're right there in Stamford. They're known for being the quote unquote New York place, even though of course WWE is a monster company and they're all over. But that's
mm-hmm.
what they were known for in the day.
Mm-hmm.
I think Orlando, it makes sense because there's, tourists and visitors. They do have the Performance Center down there as well, so there is a link to the area. I think that's a little risky. My brain is saying that's a risky move. I think it's just a risky move to do. Let's say WWE has had a long-standing relationship with New York City, and New York and Connecticut. I think when you look at Florida, they're still, even though they've been somewhat, in some ways outside of events involved, they have FCW, they now have NXT, they now have the Performance Center. They're certainly involved with things down there. What if things change and they haven't established that length of rapport, and they sort of lose that buy-in. Okay, they lose their building or they lose access or something. I don't know. My brain is saying it might not work in Orlando.
Well, I could say that I think once the new ownership takes over for Vince, either Hunter or Shane or Hunter and Shane or what have you, I think that's when we may get closer to a physical building. But two things I'll say is, I think if they make a physical building, people will be more accepting of the celebrity wing of the Hall of Fame. And the second thing is, on a technicality, they don't have to do the induction at the Hall of Fame.
That is true. I mean, that is very true.
They just have to have the some memorabilia there, and they have a whole freaking warehouse of memorabilia and the plaques.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it could be a good place to store the statues that they make. And they could even make more statues.
That is true.
But as far as that goes, I could agree with that maybe Orlando isn't the best place, because if I'm correct, they were going to have it on City Walk at Universal Studios.
I remember hearing Universal a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that maybe New York might be a better place. I just don't know if that is the best place. But also, as far as getting a real building, the idea of inducting matches into the Hall of Fame could become a reality.
If it becomes more of a WWE nostalgia kind of thing, that has the Hall of Fame in it, I think then it does stand out. I think if it's just the Hall of Fame, maybe not as much. But I see what you're saying. If they incorporate not just the Hall of Fame, the statues, if they show classic matches, if they showcase things that you have experienced over the lifetime of the WWE in one place, I think that stands out a little bit more than as only a place for the Hall of Fame.
I could agree with that. Before we move to the next topic, let me ask you, if, let's say, at the Royal Rumble they come out and they show the video package and the first induction into the 2017 Hall of Fame was a match, which match do you think goes in?
My brain wanted to jump to the first WrestleMania main event because that was talked about, but because of the current status of relationships with Hulk Hogan, I don't know if that would be a reality. So I would say the one match that people talk about all the time in wrestling history is Ric Flair and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat.
I could agree with that. And I also agree with, due to the current relationship with Hogan and WWE, it may be a little difficult to bring Hogan into the Hall of Fame again, as far as matches go. I think that it's slowly getting repaired with the two as time goes on. But, I think that with the fact that they're in Florida this year for WrestleMania, inducting the match when Dusty turned babyface and cut his American Dream promo would be a fantastic first choice, especially with how highly respected Dusty is in the WWE.
I could see that.
Or Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels.
I mean, and that I sort of laugh, but that really defined a generation of wrestling for a lot of people, so I could see that too.
That's true. Or Ric Flair versus Dusty.
That is also a good contender.
Yeah. Well, now we move on to the part of the show where the guest gets to pick his Obscure Wrestler of the Week, and or either the Obscure Wrestler of the Week, the Indie Company of the Week, or both. So the floor is yours.
So, my brain has so many people when it comes to the Obscure Wrestler of the Week, and what's been really cool lately is a lot of people who were obscure not too long ago all of a sudden have gotten a lot of acclaim. So I'm a little like, I don't know who I should say in this one. So give me a moment. I'm going to circle back to that in a second. I will say my wrestling company of the week is Wrestling Revolver. They've had an interesting amount of buzz on them. They are going to have their second event ever not this coming weekend, but next week on the 28th in Clive, Iowa, just outside Des Moines, ran by Sami Callihan. It's going to feature a lot of people from Lucha Underground, some stars from Impact Wrestling, and some of those people who are probably deserving of some more recognition. I would say especially Dave and Jake Christ, Desmond Xavier, and Zachary Wentz. All of them sort of stand out to me as people who people need to watch more of them. I think Desmond's name keeps growing more and more, and I think his initial training at MCW Pro Wrestling, which is also garnering a great name in the world of wrestling, all the way through to where he is now with Rockstar Pro and Combat Zone Wrestling. I think he is somebody who is going to continue to turn a lot of heads, and that pace may pick up soon.
So, I'm guessing you picked Desmond Xavier as your Obscure Wrestler of the Week?
I'll say Desmond Xavier, yes. So I could just imagine him giving me a head slap first, and then he was obscure.
And say the name of the company again?
Pro Wrestling Revolver.
Pro Wrestling Revolver. Well, props to Pro Wrestling Revolver and Desmond Xavier for being this week's Indie Company of the Week and Obscure Wrestler of the Week. And with that being said, we move to the final part of the show, and that is the question of the week. And the question of the week is, with how involved you are in pro wrestling, I figured it would be fair to ask this question. If you were to entrust your company to just a two-man creative team, and you could pick anyone that's available, and if you need justification to what I mean, or further description of what I mean, back when Jim Cornette was with Ring of Honor, the creative team was himself and Hunter Johnson, Delirious, and that was it. So if you could pick any two people to entrust your creative team with that is available right now, who would it be? So,
well, I'm not going to take the easy road, because honestly, if it was just a two-man team, I'm on it. And just to be fair, and because I have seen this, it's pro wrestling. Who trusts anyone? Just to call that spade out. But realistically, I think that I've seen that failing happen too inside of wrestling, where people go, "Well, I guess I need to give my control away," and then they seemingly lose control and then have to recoup it in some other way. And so I think that I always have seen that as a challenge. But if there were two people, I had to go, who could do this? That I could, take my hand up off of it and go, you two run it. I would say Dan McDevitt, who is the owner and promoter of MCW Pro Wrestling. I have, in the year I have been with them, I have learned so much. And to see how knowledgeable he is, how on top of his game he is, and when you start to look at the people that he has trained or been involved in their training, and I mean that includes Lita and Orlando Jones and Leo Rush and Patrick Clark, and the list just continues. Lita recognized him in her Hall of Fame speech. So I would start with Dan McDevitt. The other one, I get like, oh no, who would be that second person? Because I think also have to be somebody who I am close with, or someone who I think would understand my ideal or what I want, but who I also think is smart with the business. And there is a guy, I'm going to say his name, and I know not a lot of people are going to know who I'm talking about. A lot of people don't know who I'm talking about. This person was a graduate of the ROH Wrestling Academy. He was trained by Delirious. He had the name of Milo Shizo. And people are probably like, what? And even if they knew Milo, they're probably like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Like, he was only in wrestling and he was only really active in wrestling for a few years, and is now not involved anymore. But he has such a wrestling brain. He is probably the most intelligent, wrestling-wise person I know when it comes to storylines and gimmick development and in-ring ability and in-ring training. He gets it, and he's a younger guy who sees kind of obscure stuff in cool ways that things could be presented as well. And he, for a while, also ran his own company, and it was one of the best run organizations that I ever saw, and didn't expect it. It was so interesting to see him do that and put that together. I'm like, wow, this is really good. And for his first event in the middle of nowhere, drew 425 people, which on an indie level for a first event is pretty decent. And I think his top name was Delirious. And so I would say Milo, and Milo would probably look at me and turn me down, and then I would go to Delirious. But I would go to Milo because I would think he's a friend, and I think him and I think similarly, but I also think he can stand up on his own and really give it his all.
Well, props to Milo then. We're just giving props to everybody today.
Yay!
And I will mention that I did post this question on Twitter earlier in the week, and I did say that Kevin Sullivan and Dutch Mantel would be my choices, but right now I'm saying that I would probably have to pick either James Beard and Raven, or if James Beard or Raven turned me down, I would go to Rick Knox, the senior official from PWG.
Gotcha. And my brain is kicking itself for not thinking of Dutch Mantel. It really is. Just on that side note.
And I will say that the reason why I picked those people to elaborate on it like you did, is because the amount of great minds, I don't know for sure. I know Raven has never technically been a booker. He has had his ideas received and listened to by Paul Heyman and ECW, but he didn't book ECW. And as far as I know, James Beard never was the official booker. I know he worked the creative team, but he learned from guys like Skandar Akbar and Eddie Gilbert and Bill Eadie and Gary Hart, guys like that, the great minds of the 80s. But also Raven learned from Dusty. Raven learned from Paul. Heck, I wouldn't be surprised if Raven learned a little bit from Eric. He learned from Kevin Sullivan. He learned from... Oh, in a way, he learned from Eddie Graham, but... and for anybody who doesn't get the reference, Eddie Graham taught Dusty, Kevin Sullivan taught Paul taught Raven, Paul also taught Gabe Sapolsky, Rob Feinstein, etc. So, Eddie Graham's reach in the business, with the success rate of Paul and the success rate of Dusty and Kevin, shows how good Eddie Graham was as a booker. But yeah, that's the reason why I would pick those two, because I feel like they had the opportunity to sit under the learning tree and they absorbed a lot and it's clear in there how they speak of the business and how they think the business should be. Now we move to, if there's anything that you want to hype up, anything, social media, upcoming shows, etc. Now's your opportunity to, build that stuff up.
So certainly you can follow me on social media on Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat at PSPhenom. That's PSPHENOM. Again, that's on Snapchat, Twitter, and Instagram. And then also from the desk of Nate Stein. From the desk of Phil Stanford. On Facebook. That's probably the best way you can find me on social media. And then when it comes to wrestling events, I would start with MCWProWrestling.com. A lot of events throughout the state of Maryland. We've had three events this month across Maryland, and we'll have 3 events in November. So make sure you check out MCWProWrestling.com. Pro Wrestling Empire is this weekend on the 22nd in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, featuring Ric Flair. Pro Wrestling Revolver in Iowa on the 28th. Grand Slam Wrestling next month on whatever the second Saturday is of the month, which my brain is blinking on. I think that's the 12th. So those are some of the companies that I work for, and I hope that people check them out. So again, MCWProWrestling.com, ProWrestlingRevolver.com, ProWrestlingEmpire.com, and then Grand Slam Wrestling is GSWrestling.com.
Cool. I couldn't have said it better when we started this, that the man of many hats has joined me for the last hour and 20 minutes talking about a vast variety of different subjects in the world of professional wrestling.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
And to you, the listener, I want to hear from you. So leave a comment, you can leave a like, and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this that you can only find right here at Wrestling Express. Till next time. Hope you enjoyed.